Been asked for a while what my opinion on the 48 Laws of Power is as someone who researches the unwritten rules of work. But specifically, I want to call out this commenter who asked me to talk about it only if it didn't hurt my business. And I genuinely appreciate that because especially on YouTube, it is rare that people acknowledge the labor, especially of women who do this work. As a class researcher in particular, I can be vilified for that I don't work for free, though I don't know how I would survive in this class system if I did. Someone who talks a lot about invisible labor and unfair expectations of labor, I appreciate you a lot. The honest answer is this video talking about this book that has been out for over 30 years does not take any business away from me. It actually shows why my work on the unwritten rules of work is still important. Because Robert Greene, the author of the 48 Laws of Power, admits himself that the laws of power are inconsistent. Even within the book, the laws are very inconsistent. A big reason I talk to y'all so much on my page about the context mattering is because the context plays a role here, as well as expertise. One of the laws is don't ever win arguments, but another law is to always crush your enemies. One of the laws is to conceal your intentions. Another is to build a reputation for honesty. One law is to never outshine the master. Another is to make yourself indispensable. So how do you know which one to choose when and with who, and how to do that without triggering another law? He himself tells you power is situational. What works in one context will backfire in another. That is what my clients hire me for. That is what I'll show you some examples of in this video. Judgment is shaped by expertise. And I've been studying this stuff for over a decade. Cross industries, cross class, intersections of race and gender, and neurodivergence, etc. Because what even works in one context for one person may completely backfire for somebody of a different identity. And a lot of y'all don't want to hear that. But I can't tell you how many of my clients are women of color who come to me and are like, so I had a white man coach and he was telling me to do things that I know will get me fired because the context and your identity in the context also shape all of this. So this book is useful. It does hand you a hammer. It doesn't tell you what's a nail and what's not. So I am happy to talk about this and it doesn't take anything away from me, but I do genuinely appreciate whoever this person is following me. I don't know them personally, but I appreciate your support of small women-owned businesses. This video will not replace what I do. It likely will show you why what I do is needed if you're in any of these situations. So how have I seen this play out? I'll give you a recent example. One of my coaching clients who does one-on-one coaching with me, but then shows up to group coaching, which I do weekly in my school, came to the coaching call and I could tell by the look on her face that something had happened. She was doing nearly executive level work, and by that I mean doing across department collaboration, knows how everything works, and has the social capital across everything to make major initiatives within the organization happen. Without her, the major projects and goals are not met. She had been making the case for promotion since fall because in that 4 years she had never been promoted. Frequently working overtime, going above and beyond, but never rewarded. The promotion conversation kept getting delayed. And there were justifiable reasons. Organizational restructuring, as we're seeing everywhere right now. They had her doing all kinds of work to prepare for this. They said they were open to the conversation. They realized she did so much, but they needed to know everything. And they had her write down all the tasks she's done, essentially build her own job description. And she did. So they looked at what she gave them. And after several months, 3 or 4 months, they sent her a director level role, all of her roles and duties that she was already doing for a director title with no pay change. That director title didn't come with a change in role classification, so they said that is why the pay change didn't happen. So she came to that call and a direct quote was, "I've been shaking with rage, and I need to know that I'm not crazy." And this is a hallmark sign of a toxic work environment, that she knows that something is wrong, that she's been gaslit for so long, she needed verification. The first thing I told her and everyone on the call was, no, you're not crazy. It's happened to me personally, much earlier in my career. This is a common thing. She was not the only one on the call who had experienced this. And the second thing I said was, have you heard of the 48 Laws of Power? She said, I have, but I've heard it's terrible advice, so I haven't read it. I said, it is terrible advice, but it's still good to know. So for those of you who are new to my channel, I'm Dr. Anna Kalschmidt. I'm an industrial organizational psychologist, and my Ph.D. research centers on unwritten rules in workplaces with a focus on social class mobility, people moving up in social class via employment. Our work particularly serves people who are from working class backgrounds, who don't have parents who can guide them through this, who didn't grow up with the class culture codes that they're experiencing in workplaces, who have probably never even heard this acknowledged because it was a dissertation for a reason. And I also look at how race, gender, and neurodivergence intersect with these identities to shape that unique experience and the impact on the organization. I wrote the manual. It has never been passed around. But you know what has been passed around? The 48 Laws of Power in MBA programs in the US for 3 decades. It's been treated like the Bible. You can literally buy it, leather bound, like it's a Bible. It came out post Jack Welch really starting to gain attention in the US, which you'll need to check my other videos on Jack Welch if you don't already know that lore. We are seeing the 48 Laws of Power play out in workplaces and on the national scale because it's not specific to work, the 48 Laws of Power. It is about power, which means it gets played off as it's about leadership, but those aren't inherently the same thing. But we are seeing national and workplace leaders pushing this narrative, and some of them are even telling us this out loud. We'll get to that. This is such a commonly accepted Bible of American culture as leadership that even the leaders who go, every case study in this book, almost every single one of these people ended up exiled, murdered, overthrown because of this bad behavior. Even if you notice that, it is shameful to say it out loud because you will piss off other leaders. And you're like, why are you saying it out loud? Well, I literally wrote the book on the unwritten rules of work, so this is kind of my thing. I want to be really clear from the start. I am not recommending you follow this book. This is a book for people to follow if they want temporary power gasms at the expense of their own success, legacy, and even their lives. I am recommending you know it exists because it is so common that there is a very small chance you haven't worked for someone who was applying the principles from this book. You don't know what it is. You are going to keep experiencing situations. You feel like you're in constant chaos, bad luck, or it's a you problem, and falling for traps that they are setting for you that everyone else knows are actually a system that was set on purpose. Only the people who know this know not to fall for those traps. I'll link the book in the description of this YouTube, and I'll link it where if you buy it, I do get a small kickback. I'll be transparent about that. But so does a small Black-owned woman-owned business in DC. My second hometown, my original hometown, is too small for a bookstore. While we're talking about power, let's redistribute some of that power, shall we? It doesn't have to go to Amazon. And if you're not a book buyer, though if you are, I recommend because my coffee is heavily highlighted and noted, always support your local library, but do not damage their books. All right, so let's get back to my client. She'd done everything right for 4 years, absorbed responsibilities that were never supposed to be hers, taken on a bunch of invisible labor that was never recognized but critical for the success of the organization, unwritten rule of additional labor, was successful over and over again, drove impact for the organization, made her boss look good, and everyone liked her. She had social capital across all of the departments. She was not the exiled, abused employee, which I also work with. She was even well-liked and still not getting rewarded. Her social capital was even being used by her boss to get things done because he didn't have it. And while she came to group coaching, quaking with rage, as she told us, she was also subtly letting her boss off the hook. She said, I don't think he knows what he's doing. I don't know how it happened. He just seems kind of dumb. I talk about weaponized incompetence in my book. I'm not going to go down this rabbit hole in this video right now, but that's when I said to her, I think we need to talk about the 48 Laws of Power. And I could tell when she pulled up the ebook on the call because I saw in her face the recognition of what was happening. And she started reading aloud the laws that applied, and the virtual coaching room went cold. Do you know how screwed up something has to be for a virtual room to go cold? So let's talk about what some of these laws are. Law number 3, conceal your intentions. That job description didn't appear out of nowhere. Someone made a deliberate choice to have her do it, likely because they didn't know everything she did. And instead of involving her in writing her new description, the director not classified for higher pay role didn't involve her in it. Why? Because if she's in the room when they write it, she can have leverage. She's also not going to keep doing all the work she's doing for all of those months if she knows there's not a reward coming. She can say, that doesn't actually match what I'm doing, or no, that can be delegated to someone else, or I think you're missing that this would interfere with me doing this. Keeping her out and presenting it as a done deal keeps her reacting and not negotiating. That's part of concealing their intentions. It was a power move. It wasn't a smart move, but it was a power move. There's another law at play here, law number 7. Get others to do the work, but always take the credit. She was running 21 working groups. 21. I don't know how she did it, but she was. But did she get the credit? No. They didn't know she was doing that. That's why she had to write the description. All of those groups being run successfully, the people who benefited from them, they were taking the credit. She also launched 2 major initiatives for them, 2 projects they could not get off the ground without her, but they weren't going to pay her more for it. And this is where laws start contradicting each other. Because one of those laws is don't outshine the master, you become a threat. This is especially salient for women of color, and men of color too. Don't outshine the master, but make yourself indispensable. She was indispensable. They didn't want to do that work. They didn't even always know it was happening. They were taking credit without acknowledging or paying for the labor. But part of how they kept her from being a threat was not promoting her, never recognizing the labor, keeping it down. Because if they admitted it was impressive, she would be a threat. And we're seeing this being blatantly said in American politics right now. Now, I'm not a political scientist or a geopolitical expert, but I cannot help when the President of the United States explicitly says this law out loud, like he recently did, but acknowledge it. And this is why I talk about what our perceptions of leadership are. Our workplace conditions are reflections of the culture in general. I've written and recorded videos about cultural cycles several times. I'll try to remember to link those resources in this video, but essentially the larger cultural idea influences the policies and the laws at the national level, the policies and ethics of your institutions you're within, how we interact with each other and yourself. And President Trump very blatantly and publicly said to his vice president, J.D. Vance, recently, if your negotiations with Iran go well, I'll take the credit. If they don't go well, you're taking the fall. That was published in a video and then quickly taken down, probably by someone else, because you're not supposed to say that out loud. That's part of the unwritten rule. But that's law number 7, said out loud. Why did he say it out loud? Well, Trump is always known for being candid, not honest, candid. It could be he's in his second term and he knows he doesn't care. It could be that he's nearly 80 years old, so he doesn't care. Could have even given him maybe a hit of a power orgasm to know I can say this out loud and there's nothing you can do to me. But you don't normally say it out loud, and that's part of my unwritten rules on indirect communication, so that you have plausible deniability. Because the way to really successfully do that is to build a case against someone that is more believable. And I say successful in the short term because it does backfire. But something you need to know is that just because our possibly cognitively declining president, the second one we've had in 4 years, is saying this out loud doesn't mean your boss is. And it is happening even when they don't say it out loud. So you need to know what it is to recognize it. Because Trump more subtly did this to Pete Hegseth. They were all on a panel, I don't remember which, that's the point of the fire hose, as Steve Bannon told us in the first Trump term, is so that we can't keep track of all the chaos happening. But it was a panel with him. It was right before Pam Bondi got fired, Pete Hegseth and Stephen Miller. And when the press asked about Iran, Trump looked at Pete and said, well, Pete, this was all your idea, so why don't you tell them? That is usually how the law of power shows up. Very directly, but subtly at the same time. You could see even Pete Hegseth going, wait a minute. Because he knows these laws of power to a certain extent. He knew what had just happened. Now, he didn't know them well enough to not know all of the other indicators in Trump's behavior of that he was never going to take the fall for this. He always blames and fires. He's quite known for the phrase, you are fired, is he not? But Trump used another power play. Pete, in particular, is grossly underqualified for his role. He was kicked out of the reserves And one of the laws is to find someone's thumb screw. That's what the book calls it. I've never heard that term elsewhere. But basically find their weakness and exploit it. Trump offering the Pentagon to someone who had to leave a brief military stint in shame was offering something to Pete that he couldn't resist. A chance for vengeance, a perceived wrongdoing that probably threatened his masculinity, that he couldn't stay in the reserves, and to show all those 4-star generals that he was now above, that he was deserving and that he was better than them. But what Pete missed, among many things, is that you cannot trust a narcissist. You cannot make yourself indispensable to a narcissist. And look, even if he voted for the man 3 times, he is a textbook case of narcissism. You are always expendable to someone who will always choose themselves over anyone or anything they are leading. If someone who will choose themselves temporarily is so defensive, they can't think long term, even if it drives what they are leading into the ground. A narcissist does not live in reality. So the law about never taking the fall is always a tool in their toolkit. You cannot make yourself indispensable to a narcissist. You are always expendable. They will always choose themselves. You are always being used. The irony is that we reward these laws of power and organizations that we have portrayed them as leadership for at least a certain group, usually white men who are from upper class backgrounds, get away with this. What inevitably ends up happening is they have made so many enemies that we see what happened to most of the men in the case studies in the group. They end up being exiled, executed, and overthrown. You could make the argument, and I have in my Substack, that the whole situation with Iran is because Trump followed another law of power. Never step into a great man's shoes. Law 41. If you've ever seen your bosses make the same mistake over and over and over again and wonder why don't they learn from their mistakes, it's because of this law. Because this law encourages them to go in and get rid of whatever the guy before you was doing, no matter what, especially if they were successful. And in Trump's first term, he threw out the deal with Iran. Why? Because Obama did it. Did he know anything about Iran? I'm not an Iran expert, but in 2017, an expert did write in the Washington Post that Trump has just turned Iran to be anti-America by getting rid of this deal. And then years later, again, not knowing anything about how Iran is structured, that they had several people lined up to take power if their leader was executed, when Trump went in to destabilize, hoping for another Venezuela situation, they were ready. Same did not apply, and this is again where he didn't listen to Robert Greene's own advice about power and context. What happened in Venezuela is not the same as Iran. If you build your leadership on just not being the person before you and trying to make the last person look bad, you also refuse to learn from mistakes, and you open yourself up to making the same mistakes, which in turn makes you look incredibly stupid. Like I said, I'm not an expert on Iran. I know it's a complicated situation, but even a lot of Trump supporters were like, dude, what are you doing? Where I've seen this in my work is what I call the unwritten rule of compliance, where people are not allowed to speak up. You're not allowed to present a new idea, even if there's the appearance that they may perform asking you. And that is because this law, this power trip in their mind, that if somebody else has an idea or someone else did something good, we just need to pretend it didn't happen. And if I pretend it doesn't happen, it'll all be fine. But it doesn't. It sets you up for repeating mistakes or not applying good lessons learned that could be used moving forward in a positive way. The irony is, in the Trump situation, I don't think the everyday American knew much about the Iran deal until all of this. So these mistakes can even emphasize what you're trying to draw people's attention away from anyway. And this is why I tell you that the laws of power are how to have chaos so that you can temporarily stay in power and have a powergasm. They are not to be successful. They are not to leave a legacy. And once people see through this facade, then you just look like an idiot running chaos. So I told you about my client in the beginning. We'll call her Carol. Now let me tell you about my client who we will call Robin. I have permission to share this. I just never reveal people's names. Robin had been in an abusive work environment for a long time. So when she finally left and found a new organization, she hired me literally before she even started the new job because she said, never again. I am never doing this again. And everything had looked good in the interview. No red flags. But this is a woman who is pretty senior, almost executive. She wasn't born yesterday. She knows what a honeymoon looks like. And everything went well in the interview. Everything went well first few months on the job. And we worked on learning what these rules are, working on boundaries, working how she presented herself to not open the door to any of this. Sure enough, we ran into both the doors of opportunity and the doors of trying to pull her down. The door of opportunity was a senior leader putting her on the spot, which at first, because she was nervous, she felt attacked, but she realized, and how he did it and the follow-up and what we talked about, that he was actually trusting her and putting her in an opportunity to show off her work and take credit for it. He wasn't pulling a law of power. He was being her sponsor. He could have prepped her more, okay? But it also shows his trust that he was like, Robin's got this. Now, the selling the challenge actually came from someone who's not as high as her in the organization, but who has a close relationship with an executive. They tried to do what I call the feigned concern power trap. They tried to say they were worried about her because she just wasn't working as quickly as they expected, even though they report to her. She brought the situation to me and was like, something feels wrong. Because what that was designed to do was to get her to show how much of a workhorse she could be. But by doing that, she would be pulling herself down a rung on the ladder. That someone below her could trigger her in that she had to prove how much work she accomplishes versus what is rewarded in these rooms and higher power is the idea and showing results and not emphasizing how everything works. Because another rule of power, one of these laws, is to make everything look effortless. And working class people are especially susceptible to this. Also, if you have an immigrant background, because you have been told the mantra of work, 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 that part of your work is your value, that it is virtuous, that it is good. And I'm not saying it's not, but it's not what the upper echelons care about. And they see it as working class labor. The valuable labor is what they do. It's the cerebral work. Do I agree with that? No. Do I think it's gross? Yes. Also heavily tied to racism. Because we laid the groundwork for this client to understand these power traps, because she had had enough, she was ready when one almost certainly came. Now, my client, Carol, unfortunately, I can't undo 4 years before we started working together. I can't help her make a plan. Carol's already out the door. Carol, because she is such a high performer, has had interviews for a while. She's just waiting on the right thing. And when she finds the next thing, she's going to be Robin, because she's hit her I've had enough point. She's done. Now she's doing the bare minimum at the current job and working on developing her skills for the next and finding the next, where she is going to lay down the law instead of being at the mercy of it. And what's happening there is what we call in my field disengagement, informally known by y'all in the past few years as quiet quitting. And Gallup, the workplace analytics behemoth, just announced its 2025 results. Globally, only 20% of the workforce is engaged, and it's costing $10 trillion to the global economy. Of all the things costing the global economy right now, like that war with Iran, this one is within business owners' control. There are real costs to running an organization like Napoleon or Machiavelli, which are the case studies in the 48 Laws of Power. Which is why I say, only do this if you need a short-term powergasm, not if you want a legacy and to actually make a living long-term. And be aware of these also, to be an informed citizen, because we did talk politics, but also in your organization to recognize when you see these traits, because we have been conditioned to accept them as normal and signs of leadership or just white man behavior, but they're not. They are very intentionally trained. My mission, and the reason why I do this work, is to get more competent and empathetic people in power. Not only because it's the right thing to do, but also because it's the smart thing to do. As an IO psychologist, I look at individual and organizational impacts. It's good business. The people with the most capacity and the most competence are spending too much of their energy, especially if they're also neurodivergent, trying to read these unwritten rules, trying to navigate a system that was not made for them. And is it even made for the success of the organization? And they're draining their energy there instead of actually doing what drives results. That's why I said to a fellow IO psychologist earlier this year, even for selfish reasons, business leaders need to know what the unwritten rules of work are, because if you know you need them for performance, be transparent about them. If you need that indirect communication, if you need nobody to disagree with you, be transparent. And if you don't need them, you need to stop sabotaging yourself. The 48 laws of power show you how to win a battle. They do not help you win a war or keep things running. I would make the argument your organization shouldn't be a war. But if you are watching this and you have heard a version of what my clients described, or you've hit your I'm done moment, the fake promotion, the invisible labor, the credit taken, the traps, that's exactly what I work with. This book shows you 48 plays. It doesn't tell you which one is being run on you right now or how to get out of it. So if you want to know how this applies to your specific situation and your context, I'll put the links in this video on how you can contact me and what services I offer. If you're pretty high up and you're ready to move higher, I recommend one-on-one coaching. If you're much earlier in your career and you don't want to get to this point, join my school community where we do weekly group calls for a much lower price. We also have several leaders in there. People learn from each other all the time. A lot of people like to do one-on-one and supplement with group coaching, like Carol did. We did one-on-one calls, but the weekly she needed the group support, and we had her. So thank you again to the commenter who asked for this video, and I'll put all the links in the description.